I remember when we first got the message that we would be able to do a longer form storytelling, the first thing we said was, cool, what are our examples? Where can we find other people doing this in the space, and how can we go that way? And so I think excited at first, and then it became like okay, how do we actually do this thing?
This documentary was filmed in Los Angeles for Under Armour, and this was number 3 of the documentaries that we were filming over the course of a few months. This episode is currently out now on my YouTube channel. Also, throughout this video, you will be hearing from my buddy Manny. He works at Oztech Media and was really my right-hand man for making this entire thing happen. The amount of calls that we were on was insane to make all 3 of these documentaries. Throughout this video, I will be telling you about our number 1 thing we are looking for, our biggest constraint, my number 1 tip to you if you're shooting a documentary or making something similar to this, and why I think this story actually worked. I think something that we kept coming back to was multiple locations was the number 1 thing that's gonna make a story. Yeah. Interviews can't carry a story.
The more that you interacted with them in different environments, the more you understood that there's different elements of a story to be told. Being around family in a house versus being by yourself training versus being in a crowd training, like all of those are different emotions and different vibes. And also, like, you would know more than me, like you get different interactions with the person that you're shooting from each of those different locations.
For Chris Henry, we went training with him, and then we went to his family's house, and then finally the Under Armour camp. For Kendra Harrison, we went to his high school football banquet, then a charity basketball game, in the camp. Having moments like the prayer at Chris Henry's house. Those are things that I can tell you a Polynesian family is close, but if I show you, it's going to be a lot more impactful. This is what is going to help you make your documentary not feel really slow. I've watched a lot of documentaries that I'm like, man, is this ever going to end? And I didn't want this to be like that. I didn't want people to be checking if it was over. Now, maybe it was slow to you. If it was, sorry, I really was trying my best to make it intriguing the entire time. But I feel like having those in-between moments on top of the interviews is what can really help you make your documentary not feel repetitive. Now, number 2, our constraint for this documentary. You're always going to be working inside of some kind of box. If somebody comes to you and gives you 110% creative freedom, it's almost more overwhelming because you don't have anything to work inside of. For Kendre, his mom called us the day before and was like, he's supposed to play in a basketball game tomorrow. How would we have showed that he's a dual sport athlete without that game happening? I don't know.
I think as a producer, it scares me a little bit because it's like, we're deviating from the script. Like, how can I get you access to that spot? Or like how can we make this work? More times than not, the pivots are what make the story just that much better. Like, if you look back at it, you're like, without that pivot, it wouldn't be what it is right now.
For us, on the surface, this was Chris Henry Jr. His dad played in the NFL. He's named after his dad. We could tell the story of his dad, but that's not what we wanted to do. We wanted to tell the story of Chris Henry Jr. as the 5-star football player and his family. So we still wanted to touch on his dad, and we needed to figure out a creative way to incorporate that, but not make it too much of a focal point. Sometimes it is hard to bring up these things, like asking him about his dad who passed away a while ago, and he never got to really know him that much. It's a hard thing to bring up as a human, because you want to have that human experience, you want to be a normal person, but it will help the story come across. So the biggest thing is to build that comfortable environment, and this leads me into my number 1 tip. My number 1 tip is just to make a human connection. Whenever, we show up to meet the trainer, to meet him and his mom at that first night, the biggest thing was not having cameras out right away. As somebody who's not necessarily filming the thing, how do you navigate that?
I think for us, we sort of approached it from like a standpoint of, if we were the people that were shooting, how would we want to interact with ourselves? And I think, like, even on those initial calls that we had with each of the families and each of the athletes, like, it was super important to us to just be as authentic as possible, not only for the actual clip itself, but just so like they understand that we're not just like a traditional media or a traditional news source, that we're really approaching this from like a, hey dude, we just want to do what's cool for you, and we're still like trying to figure it out, and we want to figure it out with you. And so we know that they're younger athletes and that they already have press and media in their face so much, so it's like, how can we navigate it in a way that they almost go like, I've never interacted with a group of guys like this. Like, this makes me want to just like invite them in and have deeper conversations and to sort of communicate better.
Whenever we got to his house for dinner, I didn't bring my camera out right away. I walked around and I introduced myself to everybody. Had a couple quick conversations, because you don't want to be the random guy that walks into somebody's house and just right away starts filming everybody. They're going to be uncomfortable. You have to break that wall down and accept the fact that people aren't really that comfortable on camera. So be a normal person, be a human, and make those human connections. Now finally, why I think this is my favorite documentary that we filmed, and why I think it actually worked. Whenever I was in film school, I wasn't in film school for very long. I dropped out after my sophomore year. I learned that the midpoint of a movie, the turning point, typically was almost exactly in the middle. So whenever we introduced his dad, told the story of his dad a little bit, that was in the midpoint. So it turns the energy of what's going on. You were introduced to Chris, his family, and now you're learning about his dad, and then we're gonna go back to Chris. That midpoint is essential because it makes you realize, okay, there's a turning point, there's more that I wanna watch for. That makes it interesting. I also think it worked because I didn't tell the story in chronological order. Whenever we were there filming, the order that everything went down was Chris training, and then next day we went to his house for dinner, and then the next day after that we went to the UA Next camp. I didn't tell the story in that order because the story is not a vlog from that weekend. It's a story about him. It's a documentary. So it doesn't have to all make sense in the order that you actually shot it. You almost have to disconnect yourself from the entire project in that way. The story had a beginning, a middle, and the end. At the end of the day, story wins. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you're not already, and so you don't miss the next documentary, and I hope you're enjoying them so far. Thank you. Goodbye.